Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room. I'm experimenting a little bit today. I'm using a different phone. Now don't get excited if the quality of the video is better because this is my mum's phone, so I'm not going to be able to use that phone indefinitely, but I just wanted to do a little test. Now today I wanted to discuss the topic of social media and in relation to psychological types. Rather than trying to give a description of how a particular type is going to relate to a particular type of social media, I'd like to make an argument. And in order to deploy the force of that argument, I want to suggest that now social media are not bad in themselves. They're not, good for the individual in themselves. There's no doubt they have had great social power in many countries, but for the individual in themselves, they're not inherently good, not inherently bad. I also think that they're neither, exclusively for old people, which is obvious, but they're not exclusively for younger people either. Sometimes we think of social media in terms of generations. People say, I'm too old for social media. I think that's a better angle of analysis is really through the prism of type. And in order to launch into it, I like to use what may by now be familiar to you, which is the model of type functionalism. So just as a quick reminder, if you do not remember what this means, SE and NE, the functions of extrovert perception, are associated with the gathering of information. Introvert sensing and introvert intuition are associated with the processing of information. So that's on the side of perception, which is always logically prior to judgment, because there cannot be judgment without a prior perception. And on the side of judgments, you have first introverted judgment, so either FI or TI. And as the last link in the chain, the justification and presentation of judgment, which is the job, the task of FE or TE. So now that this is clarified, what are we to make of social media? Now, the first thing that I have to admit is that I'm personally not very well versed in social media. Like, I know how social media works, but I'm only really active on YouTube, which I guess is a form of social media. Like, I'm a little bit active on Facebook as well, but really that's for the purpose of like being in touch with certain people at this stage. And I know that Facebook nowadays is considered to be an old medium. And there's TikTok and there's Snapchat and there's no doubt many more that I'm not aware of. So here I will focus on the well-known ones, and I think that these well-known ones can be broadly divided into different categories. You have social media like Twitter and Snapchat and TikTok and a few other ones. Essentially are the social media where there's a dense proliferation of information in small packages. So you have the units in themselves are not large. There's not a lot of content, whether they be tweets or TikToks or snaps. But there's like an unbelievable proliferation of billions of those units constantly being fed at you throughout the day. I think that next to that, you have social media, which are of a slightly more varied form, a bit more malleable. Now in that I suppose you could put Facebook, but I'm thinking primarily of a social media like YouTube, where you can have YouTube Shorts, and these have been introduced more and more lately. But you also have just the long format types of videos, where the possibility to comment and to have discussions within the comment section. I think that social media, when it comes to a type like the INFJ, and in general, I would say types whose extroverted perceiving function is not very developed, is relatively or highly unconscious. So the paradigmatic four types that belong to this category are INFJ and INTJ. And ISFJ and ISTJ. I think that these are the types that are going to have the most trouble with the fast-paced social media where the units of information are small but incredibly numerous. So again, the Twitter type, the TikTok type, the Snapchat type. Now, these social media are highly different. I'm not claiming that they have anything in common, but there is still this one thing that I have in common, and that's the sort of the way in which information is conveyed, the way in which the information is fed to the viewer. There's this proliferation of small units. I think that types that have extroverted perception as their inferior, like the four I mentioned, and maybe to an extent types that have extrovert perception as their tertiary. I think that this is going to be a challenge simply because highly developed extroverted perception, highly conscious, active gathering of information in the external world. So NA and SE essentially. Now, if that's unconscious, how are you going to be able to get this information? How are you going to be able to latch onto that information consciously? Any dominance and SE dominance, any auxiliaries and SE auxiliaries are, according to my theory, going to be the most at ease, because in a way to them, it will be something that they can easily navigate. It's exactly what they do. It's exactly how they operate in the world in some sense, except that through those social media, the mode of interaction is brought to, a sort of symbolic limning of what it is like in the everyday life. It's reduced to a certain number of tasks. Get the information, react to the information. In the case of an ENTP, for example, what you're going to have is, I think there's a reason why ENTPs are so prominent in social media, because the NE dominance just gathers all the information. The TI is quite well developed. Now, the SI is not very developed. It's quite unconscious. So the processing is not very conscious, which is why, to some extent, you could expect the way in which ENTPs react to information to not always make a massive amount of sense. It's because they are logical, but the processing of the information that they can gather very, very well is unconscious. So in a way, the logic does not really have a current pattern to be applied to in some cases. So if you see ENTPs just being very at ease in this kind of context, it makes perfect sense in view of their psychological makeup. Now, the fact that they have tertiary FE also gives us an indication as to the fact that FE child is going to be attracted to trolling, for instance, or is going to have a predisposition. And that's not to say that all ENTPs love being on social media or troll on social media, obviously, just talking about typological predispositions. I think that types that are like the INFJ or the INTJ, a lot of types that are kind of high in NI, by implication, they are kind of low in SE. And similarly with SI and low in NE, by the way, they are types that typically just need more time to really just know what to make of a piece of information. I think they're going to be more at ease with taking their time with larger chunks of information. So instead of having like loads and loads of content that are very short, for them to sort of be able to limit what they engage with to a smaller number of larger chunks of information. This is more suited to the fact that their extrovert perception is unconscious, so they can never quite have complete control over when they actually gather it. However, once it's gathered, the processing is quite conscious, which means that I think they will typically be more at ease with having their time to gather the information with these bigger blocks, not as numerous, to apply the processing to those. So I think that YouTube for that it makes sense to me that NJ types, for instance, should be so active on YouTube. I mean, you could argue YouTube is so large that all types are on YouTube, but I just think that it's going to be more fulfilling to NJ types to be on YouTube than to be on those hyper dynamic, in a sense, chaotic social media, because it gives them more time for NI to make sure that SE has latched onto something so that it can process information and then, make way for judgments. So I could talk a lot more about this. Maybe I'll have a video number 2 at some point, but I'll stop here for now. Let me know what you think, guys, and talk to you soon. Bye.